Hello, my name is Georg Fassl. I'm an architect for the past 4 years, teaching and researching at the Department for Architecture Theory and Philosophy of Techniques, where I have founded the Daedalus Observatory, a space for architectonic research on the mobile and immobile. And in this clip, in the context of the course Gegenwartsarchitektur, I would like to introduce a publication that will come out later this year, which finalizes the research at the core of this setup. And to give you a quick idea what it was about, let me read you the premise of our investigation. What counts as philosophy's being and becoming, or physics movement and rest, might be compared with architecture's mobile and immobile. They are two of its most inner conceptions, forming one of its major devices. They are a pair of opposites, a bifunctional entity producing energy and negotiating between its poles. Architectural objects are charged with both of them, each in its very own way. From here, the Daedalus Observatory unfolded over a period of 6 semesters in different forms and formats, and together with 76 students, the advice of Professor Vera Bühlmann and the help of tutor Patrick Abrandt, all to be collected in this publication to come. But other than giving you an overview of what we did, I will take out one of the contents in detail. It is a text, a short story entitled Spaces, Objects and Life, dealing with the architectural activity. Objects, spaces, two basic terms of architecture, and yet not much else reveals itself as self-evident at first sight and remains as mysterious under close examination. What do they tell us? What can we articulate with them? Reflecting on this, we can build from 3 abstract architectonic principles. First, objects are in space. Second, there is space in objects. Hence, third, there must be space for architecture. Dating back to ancient Greece, we know 3 main spatial concepts: chora, topos, and canon, commonly but not exclusively translated today as space, place, and void. It is since the classical and Hellenistic period that the making sense of problems connected to space takes a vital role in many philosophical debates. And accounts of this engagement can already be traced earlier, as in the legend of Daedalus, the mythical first architect who built the dancing place, a choros, for Ariadne. The term choros derives from the Greek word chora, and is root to the words like chorus or choreography. It was most prominently used in Plato's Timaeus to describe a sort of receptacle, a third kind, neither being nor non-being, as an interval in between. Since then, the term became influential in many fields of study, for example media studies as a substance, and vocabulary to many philosophical writers, including Martin Heidegger, Jacques Derrida together with architect Peter Eisenman, and late Michel Serres. To be found in most of these writings is chora, the so-called nurse of becoming, as involving life and death, remembering and forgetting, in that sense similar to Anaximander's apeiron. A principle also reflected in the upcoming Greek polis, where the chora additionally designated the outer ex-urban area of a city. Counter the Mycenaean cities, this became the location of new sanctuaries, and ritual processions led from the inside of daily life to the outside and back again, like a dance, to make the city continuously reappear. Plato's chora is eternal and indestructible, but the chora of nascent archaic polis not. It was not a vessel with a fixed form, but like the appearing surface of a woven cloth. Coming back to Daedalus, it is in the chorus, considered together with the labyrinth and the dance, which the legend places at about the midpoint of Daedalus' career, that the whole notion of making and remaking, as mentioned before, of appearing and reappearing becomes most transparent. In early Greek poetry, chorus became to be dancing place as well as dance, or more precisely, before Daedalus made Ariadne's dancing floor in the Iliad, there was no thought given to the place for the dance. Dancing was dancing, and the measure of the dancing floor was the measure of the dance itself. The place appeared as the dance and disappeared when the dance was over. When chorus first became dancing place, it doesn't cease to be dance, however. It still was linked with the dancing of the youths and maidens who should be noted a very cosmete, decorated, in all their finery and with the pattern of their movement, their crafted cloth, and the weaving of the dancers' feet reflected in the rhythms of the poet's verse. But there started to be something to host it. A symmetry to be found in many architectonic objects, material gestures, artifacts, both in the double role as a placeholder as well as something that is held in place itself. Following this line further, let's move to the study of art history then, and also build from its proclaimed foundations, where we can find Giorgio Vasari's book on the most excellent painters, sculptors and architects, also called The Lives, as one of its first important accounts. The Lives is a book on rebirth, Renaissance, and the first testimony of this term naming a cultural movement. The collection of texts was written in the 16th century by Vasari, who was an artist himself, portraying his colleagues, in his words, as a painter. And truly, his biographies transcend a dry factual accounting of names, dates and titles. Vasari was a skillful storyteller whose anecdotes could reveal the personality of an artist in vivid terms. Vasari's artist was both a humble craftsman or artisan and a divine artificer with a craftsman knowledge, disegno. Reflecting his belief that an artist should possess a clear conception of the idea underlying whatever he was depicting, succeeding in best case in art's fundamental goal, that of imitating the natural and the human world. A common line in art history since on, resulting in gratia, grace. In the Lives, Vasari ordered the contents chronologically, reading time points upwards and historical time sideways, telling each biography starting with the birth and ending with the death of an artist, one after the other, old to young, which still is an important model of art historiography. In this manner, the whole volume forms a finite progression determined by the author's death. Further, Vasari divided the time discussed into 3 stages: the rebirth, the second period of improved invention and execution, and high time, from humble beginnings to high perfection, similar as he thought of the artist's life himself. In Vasari's order, movement leads into the hate, forms a personality or a figure, and the same progression characterizes his writing. Let's read a few lines from the beginning. The endless flood of misfortunes which swept over and drowned the wretched country of Italy had not only destroyed everything that could really be called a building, but even more importantly had completely wiped out its population of artists when in the year 1240, as God willed it, there was born in the city of Florence to the Cimabue, a noble family of those times, a son Giovanni, also named Cimabue, who shed first light upon the art of painting. And a few lines from the end as well. Although a large number of artisans studied with Titian, not many of them can truly be called his followers, for he didn't teach much, but each one of them learned more or less according to what they knew how to take from the works Titian executed. It was, and still is, widely discussed how objective Vasari's method is. Apparently, he himself had favored his friends and colleagues, confused prior periods, for example Byzantine and Greek art. And the next prominent writers on Renaissance art challenged Vasari's account. For example, Jakob Burckhardt, who in 1860, centuries later, extended art into a cultural history, in his book The Civilization of the Renaissance in Italy. And even more direct is the approach of his student Heinrich Wölfflin, trying to, as he called it, the opposite of Vasari, writing an art history without names. Wölflin's formal approach, also facing criticism today, was firstly deployed in his doctoral thesis on Renaissance and Baroque, and further developed in his book Kunstgeschichtliche Grundbegriffe, English Principles of Art History. Wölflin counts as the first art historian to consider the Baroque as a subject worthy of investigation. Before him, this period was widely dismissed, following its own etymology as impure. Still, for Burckhardt, the Baroque artists despised and abused detail because they lacked a respect for tradition. Wölflin was the first to look for a language beyond such judgment, and he found it in a comparative method that lent his arguments considerable rhetorical power. His principles contained 5 pairs of opposites: linear, painterly; plane, recession; closed form, open form; multiplicity, unity; and absolute clarity, relative clarity. 5 pairs that are thought to rotate continuously, shifting thereby between 2 periods: linear, true but not restricted to the Renaissance, and painterly, true but not restricted to the Baroque. A theory he called Wellentheorie, English wave theory. Let's apply these principles on our scheme. 2 comparable works of art next to each other, a Wölflinian double projection. First, the left painting, Raphael's Lamentation of Christ. The painting is a work of Renaissance art, considered as linear. Its painting technique is unione, a technique applying vibrant coloring, and the figures are painted equally and easily distinguishable within a clear union light. A clear outline distinguishes them from each other as well as from the landscape in the back. They have a closed, rational form. We can say the artist is interested in the objects and that they are, I suggest, dancing. Secondly, the right painting, Caravaggio's The Position of Christ. This is a Baroque painting and considered to be painterly. The painting technique is called chiaroscuro, which translates as light shadow painting. The figures are painted unequally and not easily distinguishable within a strong contrasting light. The outline is unclear, letting the dark background collect and embrace them. They have an open, irrational form. We can say the artist is interested in space. Here, the focus lies, I suggest, on the dancing place. What we can draw from this comparison is the relation of figure and ground, visually and content-wise. On the one side, we see figures on ground, on the others, figures in ground. Both show both, but one takes over, the known or the unknown, Renaissance ideal or Baroque impurity, which similar can be observed in the artists themselves. The Renaissance is interested in the figure, and the artist is with the ground, stabilizes. The Baroque is interested in the ground, and the artist becomes a figure, dramatizes. Interesting now, Vasari himself counts today as a Manierist artist, a period in between Renaissance and Baroque times, leading some historians to consider it as late Renaissance and others as early Baroque. And Vasari's writing speaks for that too, describing the specific manners of the artists and periods, drifting thereby away from Renaissance ideals. Studying the paintings of this time then, we can find figure-ground reversals, shifts in the viewer's perception, such that what at one moment appears to be the figure of a composition can become the ground in the next. The art becomes ambivalent, partly grotesque. The figures have a very long neck, are twisting their bodies unnaturally, melt together as masses, or undergo perspectival distortions. See Parmigianino, to name but one. Or as in one of Vasari's own paintings, St. Luke painting the Virgin, see the image on the screen, where the artist opens a play between the imaginary and the real. At the turning point of a Wölflinian wave, both figure and ground are equally present, and however well painted, none of them is perfected. Not to say that these are not sophisticated works of art, but they appear mixed in this given criterion. Let's move on with the argument, and therefore back to Vasari's book, now as a testimony as well as a witness of Mannerist times. Vasari's book is dedicated to Cosimo di Giovanni di Medici, called the Elder. Cosimo was a banker in a family of bankers, also known as the bankers to the Pope, and he was the first member of the Medici political dynasty, which served as de facto rulers of Florence during much of the Italian Renaissance. To say the least, Cosimo was a man of power, and he was a patron of the arts, which is how he and Giorgio Vasari crossed paths. Cosimo and Giorgio were in a creative relation in the Accademia dell'Arte del Disegno, initially Accademia e Compagnia dell'Arte del Disegno, or English, Academy and Company of the Arts of Drawing in Florence, founded by Cosimo under the influence of Giorgio, proves that until today. The painter, architect, writer, and the Maecenas, another relationship of figure and ground. The name Cosimo has its etymological root in the word cosmos, which means the universe, the world, but also stands for arrangement or order, and also adornment, which becomes graspable in the related term cosmetics, cosmos as an activity. Here, as it is argued to be true since early Greece, cosmos at times seems to share the very identity of making. In Cosimo's case, a making that seems to be tied to the dancing place over the dance. Being one of the wealthiest men in Europe at the time, he spent a substantial portion of his fortune on government and philanthropy, acting almost by destiny, as Cosimo was named after Cosmas, an early Christian martyr who was family patron to the Medici, himself an Arab physician who accepted no payment for his services, which led to his name the Serverless, or holy and mercenary, a characterization Cosimo sympathized with, as several representations of him as Saint Cosmas show. To be seen in the image above, Cosimo, respectively Cosmas, kneeling in the front row left. In Mannerism, as it was said, we can observe the equal presence of the double. And as Vasari wrote as a painter, and paintings of that time, as we have developed, come with figure and ground, we can assume both to be present in his texts as well. And we can do an experiment, trying to invert Vasari's The Lives, located on the side of the objects, before, with the help of Wölflin's principles, and see if we can find out more about space. Attempt to make it appear in a companion text to Vasari's book that doubles Vasari's writings with names with a second version without names. This text shall be called The Lives as well, but here it shall not be about the most excellent painters, sculptors and architects, but about the many lives of their patron, Cosimo as Cosmos. Here, instead of going into the height, forming a figure, we will go into the width, make ground. In this scheme, all biographies are set equal, as they all contribute to telling us about their cosmos, contemporaneity. The order here is circulating, collecting the first sentence of the first biography, the second sentence in proportion of the second biography, and so on. Always in relation to the length of each biography and rounded up or down. In difference to the original volume, this text can become infinitely long, depending on the defined resolution. Let's read a few lines of this text too. In this example, the text is set to turn 3 times, names are exchanged and sentences concatenated to let Cosimo sound through. The endless flood of misfortunes which swept over and drowned the wretched country of Italy had not only destroyed everything that could really be called a building, but even more importantly, had completely wiped out its population of artists when the birth of this great man, Cosimo, took place. Truly happy are the men who are by nature inclined to those arts which can bring them not only honor and great profits, but, what is more important, fame and an almost everlasting reputation. Even happier are those who, in addition to this inclination, exhibit from infancy a gentility and civility of manners which make them most pleasing to all men. No doubt, those who are the inventors of anything notable attract the greatest attention from historians, and this occurs because new inventions are more closely observed and held in greater amazement due to the pleasure to be found in the newness of things than any number of improvements made later by anyone at all in bringing these things to their ultimate state of perfection. The first of his works worthy of notice was done when he was 19 years old. Cosimo learned how to design and to work in wax, and as his confidence increased, he began to make objects in marble and bronze. And because these objects turned out very well indeed, he devoted himself so completely to sculpture, altogether abandoning the goldsmith's craft, that he did nothing else but chisel all day long and sketch at night. He perfected the method of drawing perspectives from the ground plans of houses and the profiles of buildings all the way up to the summits of their cornices and roofs, by way of intersecting lines, by foreshortening and diminishing them at the center, after having first fixed the point of view he desired in his time. Let me say that when he realized this fact, it caused him to learn so much from his endless studies that he can be numbered among the first who in large measure purged the art of painting of its harshness, imperfections and difficulties, and who paved the way towards more beautiful expressions, gestures, boldness and vitality, achieving a certain relief in his figures which was truly appropriate and natural. When it was completed and put in place, it was considered very beautiful. No one could really expect more from him in design and judgment, or from the way he carved and executed the work. He was regarded as an uncommon master of the problems of regular bodies in both arithmetic and geometry. This good priestly painter was Saint Lawrence, Saint Mary Magdalene, Saint Zenobius, and Saint Benedict. The truth of these statements is clearly demonstrated by Cosimo, who, having studied the Latin language and having practiced architecture, perspective, and painting, left behind him books written so well that although countless modern artisans have proved more excellent than him in practice, they have been unable to equal him in writing about their craft. The many who experimented with such methods or other similar ones but failed brought him boundless fame, since who had never before seen such a thing was suddenly struck with wonder and began most attentively to examine and to contemplate the style of such work. In the middle panel, Cosimo portrayed the occasion when Saint Francis goes to Rome to the court of Pope Honorius, presenting roses to Saint Augustine, who had begun to cast some little figures in bronze, which depicted a God, the Father, sitting in majesty among the doctors of the Church. The ground is irrational, infinite and full, and even though the horizon forms a figure, Cosimo in this text, it recedes when we approach it. The result is him performing a circle dance of the many, a Greek chorea, German Reigen, another cognate of chora, space, decorating and ordering, Greek kosmeo, a dancing place. The choreography of the group transcends the mastery of the individual. In our scheme, this text is placed on the painterly side of Wölflin's scheme. Therefore, it is related to the Baroque, or its equivalent period. And truly, we can find such environments in the paintings of the time. For example, in Peter Paul Rubens and Jan Bruegel's Allegory of Sight, one part of a series of pictures dedicated to the 5 human senses. In this painting, Venus, the epitome of visual knowledge and carnal beauty, is surrounded by artificial instruments of observation, mathematical devices, and artificial representations of natural, historical, religious, and mythological scenes. Quite literally, amidst a lot of stuff. a word deriving from staffage, a term especially popular in Baroque paintings, derived from the Old French term estoffe, meaning stuff, or the German staffieren, for decorating, which refers to unnamed humans, animal figures, and objects of all kinds that populate pictures. Despite sharing most characteristics, there is one element, the Northern Baroque, of which the allegory of sight is one example of, thematicized stronger than its equivalent in Italy. The relation to the new practices of early modern knowledge and sciences coming up at the time. Baroque was dismissed for its exuberance from early on, but when the empiricism of the new modern sciences is considered as an intellectual challenge rather than a discovery of a proper scientific method, the Baroque obsession with detail no longer appears as a self-indulgent extravagance. Rather, it is a related, sincere attempt to come to terms with the overwhelming variety of new objects that the 17th century, similar to ours, impressed in savants and artists alike. Similarly, Baroque sensuality no longer appears as decadent extroversion when one takes into account the unprecedented powers awarded to the senses by the new scientific instruments, mostly of vision. So the interest suggests itself not in an illogical playfulness, but as a study of orderliness, cosmos, and the problematic ways of producing it for artists and savants alike. An exploration of space paralleled today. Concluding, we have entered the domain of life and derive at personality in the line of figures and objects. The quality of being a distinct individual character, a person or a persona. And of the side of space and ground, we find generosity. The quality of being unselfish and plentiful. Which brings us to propose a fourth architectonic principle. Space is generous, and as such, architecturally addressable. We are in space, there is space in me, and I can give space to you. We can build a house that has space for a table, and the table again has space for us. Equally, there is generosity in the objects, in the things, between the things, and in us, opening up spaces and making things appear. And we can articulate, architecture is spaces and objects activated or bridged by life. The final volume will be available for download soon on the Daedalus Observatory website, which is daedalusobservatory.net. That is what I wanted to share. I hope I could spark some interest. Thank you for watching.